Welcome to the Blue Yonder Overland podcast. I'm your main host, Jen, and I started this podcast to inspire and empower you to spend more time outside, however works for you, but especially to make overlanding more approachable. Each week, we provide practical advice for vehicle-based camping, either focused on a topic or featuring interviews with people who are doing it, sharing lessons learned and empowering you to spend more nights under the stars. If you're new to overlanding, I'd recommend starting with our first 2 episodes on why we love it and how to find campsites beyond the campground. As always, feel free to send us any questions you have at Blue Yonder Jen at Instagram or Threads, and hopefully we'll see you out in the wild blue yonder. Hi friends, welcome to episode 6 of the Blue Yonder Overland podcast. Thanks to so many of you for engaging, asking questions, commenting, subscribing. Really appreciate all the feedback that you guys have given me, both online or behind the scenes, and the support that I've felt. Really appreciate that in the early stage of getting this podcast launched. And today we're going to unpack the dirty secrets of overlanding, which is perhaps a little bit sexier title than what it actually is. But it's really talking about a lot of the objections I hear or questions that I hear about people who are maybe hesitant to get into overlanding, and often has something to do with, well, but how do you deal with going to the bathroom? Or what about taking a shower? Or how do you, dishes or trash, like dealing with keeping really anything, but especially yourselves, clean. And I think people don't always want to admit that these super practical things might be the single biggest hurdle keeping them from getting into camping outside of campgrounds. So I think it's worth discussing ways in which we can solve these problems. Even if you personally have never thought of these things as a big deal or don't consider them a hurdle, I'm looking at you, young 20-something able-bodied men. I guarantee that whoever you are, you don't have to look very far into your family or friend groups to find people for who this is a big hurdle, and whether they're willing to admit it to you or even bring it up to discuss. So if you want your girlfriend or maybe your teenage daughter or your mom to come camping with you, how can you think about addressing these things in a way that will make them comfortable to come along with you on all of your camping adventures? So that's what we're going to dive into today, getting past practical hurdles of all the bathroom and hygiene questions, including dishes and cleanup. So we're going to walk through sort of each area one by one and discuss some strategies and setups, as well as products we or our friends have used, so that you'll see that none of these things have to be a barrier to camping outside of campgrounds. In contrast to last week's episode, which was super philosophical and really looking at hurdles around adventurous mindsets and sort of how to get past your own fears and insecurities, this episode's going to be much more focused on practical tips. I will try to spice things up, however, by weaving in some personal stories and lessons learned so that you can learn from my mistakes. So, without further ado, let's dive in. So, the biggest hurdle and question that I hear from folks when we try to get them to come along overlanding with us is often about bathrooms. And this could be from as simple as, like, how do you go to the bathroom if we're not going to be by a campground with bathrooms, to maybe a little bit more in-depth questions such as, okay, that's great that you have, a pop-up tent with a portable toilet, but what about at night? Or what about in the cold or the rain? And people have so many different sensitivities around this issue at different stages of life, or depending on what your family looks like, maybe different needs with, kids or folks that are getting older, or just so many different reasons why folks might have very, very different levels of needs. And so it's just something important to consider with whatever group you're taking camping with you. And so I think one way these things could be addressed is simply by choosing campsites strategically or by choosing setups strategically. And so for folks who really need an accessible bathroom, that might be harder to recreate that in your own setting. There's always sites that you can find that are fairly near to campgrounds or trailheads that might have toilets in various stages, maybe just a pit toilet. But oftentimes those will have accessible rails and things like that. So you could choose to, prioritize campsites that are near trailheads or other bathrooms that you've identified, and then try to structure your day and your timing around that. Obviously, that doesn't solve the problem of emergency bathroom needs at night. So especially for a slightly longer trip, that may be more of an issue. So that's when I think we can really unpack some of the really creative and innovative products that are now on the market, as well as potential vehicle setups to address different objections. So I'll start by addressing just some of the products and ways that you might be able to take care of business outside, and then unpack a few additional objections or questions that I've heard, and why then you might want to consider just a completely different vehicle setup. So I'm starting from a standpoint of looking at, things that are available even for just the backpacking community, because that's kind of the lowest common denominator. Like, you really are truly going out there with not a lot on your back and have to be pretty creative in solving these problems, but also because a lot of overlanding is done on national forest land, or land where you technically are allowed to follow the similar backpacking strategies of dealing with human waste, such as digging a cat hole and covering it. But like I mentioned on an earlier episode, I think the trend is more and more towards whatever adventures you're having on public land to try to pack out literally everything. And so I'm going to kind of be addressing it from that standpoint too, and encouraging strategies that'll help you do that. So obviously, if you're dealing with number one, it's a lot easier. And man, that's when I get jealous of the guys, because you really don't have to worry about much finding a place to go behind a tree. For those of us who have to squat to relieve ourselves, there's a few different products on the market, and backpackers may already be familiar with them, but they can be brought along for a quick and easy way of taking care of number one. So the first one I'll mention is the Kula cloth. This is often also referred to as a pea cloth. So you can look up their website. It's super creative how it's constructed. It has a non-permeable membrane on the outside, so completely liquid proof, but it folds in half, and then has an antimicrobial inside that you can use to wipe. It can be rinsed with fresh water or wherever you're at, whether you're camping on the road. It's pretty easy to wash and keep clean, and then just dries in the wind. It has a little hook, so you can hook it to a backpack or hook it to the outside of a vehicle to dry once you've rinsed it clean. And I always try to pack this along. It's also great to bring along for hiking. So even if we have a toilet set up at camp or are in a campground with toilets, I will try to always make sure I have a Kula cloth packed in my day hike backpack. That way, if you have done a great job of hydrating and really have to go on the trail, this is great to be able to wipe yourself dry. The other product that I know a lot of women have used, I haven't personally experienced it, is the Shiwi, but that's especially for if you are uncomfortable or unable to squat to take care of number one. It will help you with being able to stand and go to the bathroom just like a man. So it kind of helps relieve that barrier. I have to say that really getting into backpacking and camping after coming from living in Uganda, I think made me just a lot more comfortable with being able to physically squat. So a lot of times if you're traveling in Asia or Africa, a lot of times you won't see the traditional Western toilets that you sit on. Oftentimes it's more you squat to go into a sort of hole in the ground that'll have a little setup with a place to stand around it. And so this is where, if you've ever seen, sometimes in airport bathrooms, especially for those with lots of international flights, you might see signs that have a red X through somebody squatting on the toilet. And you might think, what the heck is this for? Like, who would think to do that? Well, if you're coming from countries that are slightly less used to the Western style bathrooms and are used to squatting, then it's worth noting that this is just an entirely different way of using the toilet. So luckily, if you are, used to traveling in those places or coming from those places, then it's pretty easy to get used to just squatting out in the forest and then using a Kula cloth. But If not, or if that's physically hard for you, then you might want to look into Shiwi as a product to help you. Then obviously, taking care of business with number 2 is entirely different. And so this, if we're on the move or sort of in transit or maybe near some hiking or activity trails, we might try and just use the trailhead bathrooms if those exist. But we tend to always also travel with a collapsible toilet with essentially a wag bag that has powder in it that could turn everything to gel. So it makes it a lot easier to deal with and dispose of and keep things from not smelling. There's a lot of products now on the market. If you even look at REI and the toilets they sell, they've got one that's just like a little flat toilet with 3 legs that can fold up into it. So it makes it pretty flat to add to your overlanding setup. And then we've got stuff that goes all the way up to what looks like the newest jewel on this market is Julka's new 2-compartment toilet, which is obviously a bit more expensive, but looks fantastic in terms of how it deals with stuff, separating liquids and solids and making it really easy to empty things, and also is a little bit higher from the ground, so might be a little more comfortable to use. You'll also see solutions from Dometic, but and other types of toilets where oftentimes it's some sort of chemicals added to help sort of deal with things, and then varying levels of, how you're going to be using it and for how long. But we often just will bring extra wag bags and toilet paper along, and then we'll bring either a collapsible tent, or we have now installed on the side of our truck Julka's answer to sort of the bathroom privacy solution. It's almost like a shower stall or a privacy changing stall, but you could also use it for a toilet. And it's just so fast and easy to set up. So that's usually what we will use, especially if we're stopping for a quick overnight. You can easily fold out this, the arms of the Julka toilet and privacy tent, and then set up our toilet inside of it. And I will also share a quite humbling story about why it's always best practice to just set up a toilet if you're somewhere that doesn't have one overnight. Me and Matt were on a overlanding trip, and it was in May, but it was a little bit cold, and we were in the Black Hills, and we stopped overnight. And we knew we were only going to be at this site just overnight. And so we had made dinner. It was pretty cold out. And so we're kind of retreated up to our rooftop tent at the time and didn't bother to set up the toilet. I'm not even sure if we had the Julka privacy tent at this point either. So it would have been setting up like the additional little pop-up tent, just one more hurdle. And so we didn't bother to do it. And then 2 a.m. rolled around and my stomach decided that it was violently unhappy with me. And I desperately needed a toilet ASAP. So I'm scrambling down from the rooftop tent. Matt is helping me find the toilet in the back of the truck, which of course was buried under something heavy. And I'm quickly getting it set up out in the dark with my headlamp and just desperate to get that toilet set up in time to use it. And so that is the lesson of why we now always just set it up as best practice before we go to bed, because you just never know when something's going to happen. Total sidebar that I think my stomach has really never been the same since living in Turkey and Uganda and, dealing with different diets, different grains and water and everything, just never quite been the same after that. But I will also say that was also a lesson learned to always pack some sort of medicine for dealing with stomach problems. And that's probably the easiest and simplest tip I can give you is pack some Imodium or pack some Pepto-Bismol or Gas-X, any and everything that might help you deal with that. Because I think that's honestly the single most obnoxious and hard to deal with health issue while you're out overlanding is if you have some sort of food allergies or food poisoning or some sort of stomach issues. That is the fastest way to turn your camping trip upside down and really make everybody unhappy. So, word to the wise, pack some meds for dealing with stomach issues. So that's just kind of a quick summary of some of the very practical solutions there. But obviously, everyone's going to have very different needs around this, and it's quite a sensitive subject. So I want to unpack just a few of the additional layers here. One thing is the older we get, oftentimes no matter how hard we try and how much we might say, oh, okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom before I go to bed, you'll probably have to get up in the middle of the night and use the bathroom. And men, especially if you've had prostate issues, I know lots of folks, then you're going to be getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, no matter what you do. So thinking about how to make the bathroom a little bit more accessible at night can be an issue. And, one way that we get around this is making sure that we hang a light in our bathroom stall or in our bathroom pop-up tent. And it's one of those you can just turn on. So might keep our headlights handy so that we can get there from wherever we're sleeping, but then also to have just a little hanging lantern that you can turn on inside the bathroom to help at night is a good idea. But then there's also the issue of if it's super cold or rainy out, and, this is where placement of the tent and thinking about whether you want it close to or farther away from where you're sleeping, depending on privacy, depending on the weather, depending on what you need, could be a factor. But even this, it's like if somebody is just not okay with going outside of wherever they're sleeping to use the bathroom in the night, then it might be time to also think about vehicle setups and platforms that would integrate the bathroom with where you're able to sleep. And so I've seen, obviously, vans are the biggest example of this, where it is integrated into like a little bathroom stall that usually contains the toilet and shower all together. And so that might be a strategy for you to pursue longer term, or maybe you would want to rent a van for a weekend adventure if you're going with somebody who the bathroom access is going to be an issue, especially if you're going with older folks. Say probably anybody over 40 is probably starting to deal with this issue. And I feel like I can get away with saying that since I'm 39 and definitely notice it if I use the bathroom right before bed or not. So thinking about a van as a potential, longer term vehicle option. But I've also seen some really interesting strategies with sort of integrated bed topper rooftop tent options. And so I forget who it was that I was watching on YouTube. I'll have to find the link and add it to our show notes at blueyonder-adventures.com. But they had a really cool pop-up rooftop tent with like sort of a sliding platform under the bed where they could climb down into their covered truck bed. And then they kept a little sort of bucket toilet there so that they could use it in inclement weather or at night. And this would be, I think, another great option for someone who maybe doesn't have mobility issues. So, a van is probably going to be the most easy to access if you do have any mobility issues. But if you're able to kind of climb up and down from a rooftop tent and want maybe a little bit of separation from the bathroom, but still want it integrated, I thought that was a really cool setup for dealing with this. So we talked about lights. We talked about possible ways you might be able to integrate it with your overlanding vehicle build. But the other, I think, factor is just sort of privacy and feeling secure or not attracting wild animals. And so, this is another area where, depending on where you're camping and what the situation is with animals being around, you might really want to opt for that sort of internally contained toilet, or be willing to kind of pack it up whenever you're not using it. So might have to be okay with quickly unpacking it whenever you need it, and then maybe storing it in a secured truck bed or something like that, just to remove the smell, which can obviously attract wild animals. Another option would be just placing it a little bit further away from where you're sleeping. But then, of course, that introduces its own issues if you're worried about accessing it at night and sort of feeling safe. So just a few things that either you might be thinking of as hurdles to your own overlanding, but also to keep in mind if you're bringing folks new to overlanding with you that maybe of different backgrounds or physical abilities or ages, think through lighting, access, how easy it is to get to at night, because those are definitely going to be things that people are thinking of. From bathrooms, I think the next most common question or objection that you might hear is, well, how do you keep yourself clean? Like, what about a shower? And obviously, this might vary depending on how long you're going for, but I think it also can wildly vary depending on what activity you're doing and what season it is. So, the first time that I went overlanding with Matt, we took a long gravel bike ride all the way down, notice down, towards a river, and got to walk along the river, dip our feet in, and then had a long uphill slog back up to our campsite, culminating in a very steep grade, loose gravel road where I just could not keep the pedals turning and had to walk my bike like the last probably half a mile. So needless to say, by the time I ended up back at camp, Matt was able to go ahead of me and then bring me back some cold ice water, and I think a cold rag to kind of help wipe the sweat off me. He was doing his best to look out for me. But by the time I stumbled back into camp with my bike, I was a hot mess, dirty, dusty, covered with, gravel dust and sweaty and just feeling pretty gross, which obviously isn't the way you want to feel if you have barely begun dating somebody and are out on a camping adventure. Luckily, it was a really hot afternoon. And so Matt had one of these Yakima water tanks on the side of his attached to his roof rack, which I think holds close to 10 gallons. I'll double check that. And this particular model is just solar heated. And so if you have a hot day, you get lucky because you then get some not cold water, although on a hot day, you might actually want that. But it gets just a little bit warmed, and then it had a little shower attachment. And so could hook that up with sort of the privacy stall like Julka that I just mentioned earlier with the bathrooms, or you can kind of rig up your own temporary privacy screen with things like doors and towels, or a rooftop rack. There's a lot of kind of creative ways that you could rig up some privacy and get a quick rinse off if you've got something like the Yakima tank to hold some water. But the other option is you could choose to camp near water or close enough to a campground or sites that might have bathrooms built in if you want to try to stop for a quick shower, maybe after an activity before you head back to camp, or maybe, if you're camping for several days, maybe it's a pit stop at some point. Another option, which I thought was pretty unique, was mentioned in Titus Adventures Guide to Winter Camping. It was talking about visiting hot springs and how oftentimes those facilities will have shower facilities built in. But it was also calling out community centers. And then from there, also thinking about not just community rec centers, but also any sort of gym memberships. So especially large national chains, maybe like Planet Fitness, where there's lots of locations. If you're doing like a long multi-site trip and don't really have your own shower solution, that might be another thing to look into is, okay, what sort of community athletic centers could I access and just get like a day pass like a YMCA or another gym that would have showers in it, or an outdoor pool or hot springs or some other facility where they're going to have showers integrated. Matt also reminded me to mention Love's travel stops or other clean, reputable truck stops as also having showers. And so if you are on a multi-day trip, maybe remembering that as a potential option for showers as well. So keep that in mind as another option. But for thinking about what you could bring with you, like I mentioned, you could have some sort of water tank. But to even go simpler than that, and I'm thinking also with backpacking, another option is some sort of wet wipes or wilderness wipes, I think is the brand that we have used, where it's just like a quick wipe to sort of give yourself a once over and get some of the dirt and grime and sweat off. There's also deodorant wipes. And so we definitely pack those along so that maybe we're not we didn't work up that much of a sweat on our walk or our hike, but still want to just freshen up a little bit and don't want to go through the trouble of taking a shower, or maybe are trying to conserve water, we'll definitely use those wipes to kind of freshen up. We also will try to pack a little bit of dry shampoo along. So if you are out there for multiple days, just use a little bit of dry shampoo if you don't want the full shower. For girls, I will also, and actually Matt uses this too, with his longer hair. We also often will use bandanas, and found a particular brand that we use. But obviously there's many brands out there. We just happened to stumble upon Buff, which I think we found it at REI, but you'll often see it sold in other gift stores or like National Park. Sometimes they'll have special patterns and stuff. But they're elastic, a little bit elastic. And so they work really well as a headband and are adjustable to pretty wide width to cover up the greasiest section of your hair. But I always pack either that or sort of a very collapsible, quick hat to wear, so that if, I'm on a third day of camping and either we're not going to take the time to shower or that's not an option, then I'll just use the Buff or the hat to make myself just feel a little bit more comfortable and cleaned up. And so don't discount that as an option either. If you just want to feel a little bit fresher, then, those quick wipes, deodorant wipes, a Buff or a hat are a quick option. And then obviously the next step would be the shower systems. And I think it's worth noting here too, just a little sidebar, that much like I bring a hat or Buff as a bandana or dry shampoo, it's worth considering for you personally, what's the item that's going to make you feel a little bit better about yourself, or a little more cleaned up, or a little more presentable, and be okay with packing that, even if it adds another extra little item or extra little weight. Because if you're overlanding, you can afford that extra space to pack something, but you can't underestimate just the psychological benefit and boost to feeling a little bit more like yourself. And so whether it's mascara or a pair of earrings or a hat, or just something that's going to make you feel a little more yourself, even when you're getting dirty or have gone for days without a shower, highly recommend figuring out what that is for you. Worth mentioning that Dirtbox Overland also has a really cool shower system setup. It's similar to the Julka, with it's a sort of collapsible framed awning. So it's got like 3 legs that fold out from a very small footprint that can be attached to a roof rack or the side of your truck or setup. And then it's like a privacy stall with, you can integrate a water tent into it for a shower. And I think some of these solutions even have, if you want to think about a footbed for standing on so that the water drains out and you don't have to get your feet dirty, that's another option. Otherwise, oftentimes we will just make sure to pack flip-flops or Crocs, something that you can stand in and the water will just drain away from you. And that can also be helpful if you are going to be using public showers or camp showers, or you're not quite sure of the situation. Then even if it's dirty and gross, you can still use them without being worried about anything like fungus or anything. The only other thing I'll mention then is we usually will pack quick dry towels. I think Rumpel is one of the brands. We've also used Nomadics with an X. They have some great quick but absorbent towels to use. And so that we'll just hang them to dry from the side of the truck. But they're also great. I mean, if it rains unexpectedly, if there's a cleanup that needs to happen, it's just always a good rule of thumb to have a quick dry towel along. They're useful for more than just showers. Okay, so after bathrooms and showers, I think the next thing that I think about that is a little bit difficult when it comes to camping is sort of how to clean up after meals, how to keep things clean, not attract animals with, food smells, scents, and then just also the inconvenience of dealing with any dirty dishes. So for dishes, our dirty little secret is that we will often do something like a very durable, heavy, pre-soaked Tough Wipe is actually the brand we use, Tough Wipes, and give the dishes and silverware or pots sort of a once over with one of those, kind of scrubbing off any food residue, And they have a little bit of soap that's sort of built into it as well. So you can kind of get a little bit of a suds there. Give those a good wipe and use that as a way of also getting any sort of food residue into a trash bag that we can then keep locked up, usually just inside our truck bed for the night, which keeps any animals from getting curious about our leftovers. And so we often won't even take the time then to fully wash the dishes until we get back home, especially if we're doing something just like a quick overnight trip where we've really only done one meal with the dishes. Otherwise, we have experimented with a few different ways of easily washing dishes. You'll probably want some sort of collapsible sink that kind of flattens up and has a drain at the bottom. And then we've often found it's easier to, when you're cooking, try to make a little extra hot water if you're boiling water for something, or while you have the stove active or lit or whatever your stove setup is. It's like while you're doing that at the end of the meal to also think about heating up some water so that you have that for washing any dishes. And that's especially if we're going to be on a longer trip or making multiple meals over the weekend or have a lot of people with us where we're going to need to reuse stuff. Then we will take the time to wash the dishes right away. We often also will have one of those small rubber reusable kind of scrubbing sponge almost, and use that. And then just easy to hang that to dry. We try to pack along some cloths as well to dry the dishes, but also having along a pack of paper towels is never a bad idea. But of course, remembering to get all of those and any wipes used in the trash with any food scraps and keeping that locked up. And that's just another quick note, is always just pack a few extra trash bags of any size to take care of not only your trash, but we will also do sort of a last walk around any campsite that we leave and try to leave it cleaner than we found it. And so picking up not only any trash that we may have generated, but just doing a last look around to make sure, nothing got swept under one of the tires or under the truck. Just taking that time to do a full walk around camp, make sure no trace of our being there is left behind, and then seeing if we can also take care of any other trash that may have been left by people at the site before us. One additional note on that is we now always try to pack either disposable or work gloves along. And this is great not only for doing dishes, but also for picking up other people's trash and not having to actually touch it. So highly recommend packing along some work gloves or disposable gloves with your reusable scrub and cloths for your dishes. With all of our topics today, I think it's really important, too, to think about how you can leave no trace behind. And so I've alluded to some of this and talked about some of our strategies for how we pack everything out, how we keep it secure from attracting animals, and also just making sure we don't leave any trace of our camp behind. But if you want more resources, I would point you towards Tread Lightly. They have a library of resources available online to help educate you on how we can responsibly use this awesome public land that we have access to and make sure that we don't leave any trace of our camps, and so that it's more likely that it's kept open for everyone to enjoy. They also do tons of different volunteer events and education events, so keep an eye out or give them a follow to stay up to date and learn more about leaving no trace as you camp. I think the other thing to highlight, with all of these solutions that I've discussed today, is really what a spectrum of options and strategies it is. And every person is going to be different. Every vehicle setup is going to be different. Every group you go with is going to have different needs. And so your priorities of what solution you might choose will likely change over time, over seasons, over where you're going, what groups you're going with, over the length of trip you're going to take. And also will vary based on budget and how much you want to pack along. Everything is a trade-off. And we'll dive more into vehicle platforms and all the trade-offs and strategy in thinking about that and how you might want to build out your overlanding vehicle, or what you might want to think about in terms of rentals or trying things out. But I think that's an important caveat, is just to keep in mind there's no one right solution. And there's a lot of different ways that you can solve these problems. And some of it might just be thinking creatively about it for whatever your situation, whatever your needs are. And also seeking out community or other folks who have solved these problems. And that's another topic I want to dive into in a future episode too, is what sort of community resources there are or community events where you might learn a lot and be surprised by the way other folks have approached these exact same hurdles to spending more time outside and the creative approaches that they put in place to solve these problems. That's been one of our favorite things as we have seen more overland vehicle rigs and setups at different expos and events, is just getting to appreciate the endless creativity that people exhibit when trying to solve very similar problems, but having slightly different priorities or different needs and the ways in which they can solve those. So that's also been, I think, a fun area for us, is even just little comfort things around camp, thinking about how we can turn up the dial on enjoying our trip, however short it is or long it is, and the little tweaks that we can make to our setup or the extra things we could add. It could be as simple as a magnetic hook for a towel near your shower setup. And that just makes it easier to keep your towel dry and accessible. So little things like that, I think, can really make a big difference too in just your enjoyment of these things and how you solve these common challenges of overlanding. One other dynamic to mention is that if you're going overlanding with a group of people or a couple family and friends, be sure to coordinate ahead of time with the equipment that you have and what you're bringing and what your needs will be, because they might have a solution so you don't need to go buy one or borrow one. And that can be a great way of reducing what you have to pack or bring along if you can kind of cobble together shared resources, whether that's a shower or whether that's the collapsible sink for dishes. And you can also take turns doing that. As often what we'll do with friends if we go overlanding is take turns who's cooking the meal, who's cleaning up after the meal, which just helps reduce the burden, but also helps reduce your use of resources, whether it's wipes or water, and just makes it a little bit more fun. On the subject of pooling resources and community knowledge, but also finding inspiration from the creative ways that other folks are solving these same problems to get out overlanding and camping, I wanted to mention that we will actually be at the Overland Expo Southern California in Costa Mesa in just about a week's time. So it is the weekend of March 15th and 16th. And we'll be there with our NS1 CampWorks electric teardrop trailer and with our partner Robotios that makes awesome solar panels to keep all your electronics charged up for your adventures. And I'm going to take the opportunity to definitely walk around and get a look at all the other adventure rigs that are there. And I'm going to try to capture some either live or just video footage that walks through some of these different builds, just different ways of approaching overlanding and different setups that will hopefully provide some great inspiration and ideas for you. And I'll be posting all of that either on Blue Yonder Adventures at Instagram, as well as to our YouTube channel, which was started by default when I wanted to get the podcast listed on YouTube Music. So I might post some of the footage if we get some good interviews or walkthroughs there as well. And then if you do have any questions about any of these topics that I covered today, as well as other questions about common overlanding setups, whether it's how people like a rooftop tent setup versus an integrated truck bed or trailer or van setup, send all those questions my way. You can either comment on any of our public posts or send me a message at Blue Yonder Adventures at Instagram or Blue Yonder Jen at Instagram or Threads. And I'll collect any of those questions that I get and try to address those either myself or by finding folks at Overland Expo SoCal who have similar setups or have the answers to the questions that you have. And we'll try to get that posted. So very excited for that next week. And that might also impact then what we post on Thursday. Hopefully we'll be talking to Matt, and my husband and his twin sister Alex will also be in the area. And so I am particularly interested to talk to them about their camp cooking and kitchen setups and prep, and see how they have learned to approach that and just lessen the burden of camp cooking by how they prep for it and how they organize. They both have done some really interesting things in that regard. And so hope to not only interview them on sort of camp cooking and kitchen setups, but also get some behind the scenes photos and footage to share with you all. So if you've got questions around camp cooking and kitchen setups and prep, as well as sort of any overlanding vehicle setups and questions that you might have, advantages to different types of setups, or how you solve some of these common overlanding problems like going to the bathroom or showering, keeping clean, send those our way and we will dig into them next week. I want to especially thank you if you listened all the way to the end of this episode. I'm so grateful that you devoted your time to listening to me today, and hope you feel inspired to spend more nights under the stars, however you want to make that happen. And if you have any feedback or questions, feel free to send them my way. I'd love to hear it. I am constantly learning and evolving as this podcast comes to life. So please feel free to send any feedback along with hitting that subscribe or like button, depending on the platform that you're using. I would really appreciate the support and really want to thank you for being here with me on our Blue Yonder Overland Adventure series. Thanks, guys, and see you next week.